Why gratuity valuation is more than just the liability. Hello friends, my name is Nilesh Tripathi. I am a partner and consulting actuary at Whitepaper Actuaries and Consultants. Have you ever wondered why an actuarial valuation is required for something like gratuity? After all, a company can simply look at its employees, calculate how much gratuity each employee could potentially receive, and add everything up. Why do we need an actuary? And more importantly, why should management care about the maturity profile of its gratuity liability? Let me explain this using something that may seem completely unrelated to employee benefits, India's external debt. Recently, India's external debt reached around 762.8 US billion dollars. Now, if I simply tell you that number, should you be worried? Not necessarily. India's external debt to GDP ratio is around 20.8% compared to 28.3% in 1991. Debt to service ratio is also much lower compared to what it was in 1991 crisis. So looking at the headline numbers, India's position appears considerably stronger. But then comes the interesting part. The analysis looks at when the debt actually needs to be repaid. On a residual maturity basis, around 326.9 billion of India's external debt are due within next 12 months. That's a very different way of looking at the same debt. And this is the important lesson. The total amount of the liability does not tell you the whole story. You need to know when that liability will become payable. Now, let's bring this back to gratuity. Imagine two companies, both have a gratuity liability of 100 crores. Company A has a relatively young workforce. Company B has a relatively mature workforce with many employees approaching retirement. Both companies show gratuity liability equal to 100 crores. Would you say their financial position is identical? Obviously not. Company B could potentially have a significantly higher gratuity cash outflows in coming years. Company A's liability may largely relate to benefit that will be paid much further into the future. So the 100 crore number by itself does not tell the management everything it needs to know. We need to understand the maturity profile. What do you mean by maturity profile? In simple terms, the maturity profile tells us when we expect the liability to turn into actual cash payments. For example, imagine that company's total gratuity liability is 100 crores. The actuarial analysis might indicate something like this. 100 crore expected to be paid in next year, 20 crore over the next 3 years, 35 crore over the next 5 years, and the remaining over the much longer period. Now, management has something much more useful than just 100 crore liability. It has an indication of the future cash flow pattern. Why is this important? Because gratuity is not simply an accounting number. It represents a future cash obligations to employees. Today's balance sheet liability represents the benefits that are expected to be paid in the future, and the timing of those payments matters. Think about your personal finances. Suppose someone tells you you owe 10 lakh. That sounds concerning. But then you find out that 10 lakh is payable over the next 20 years. That's very different from being told you need to pay 10 lakhs within next month. Same liability, completely different financial impact. The same principle applies to gratuity. This is where actuarial valuation becomes important. And actuarial valuation does much more than simply add up the gratuity amounts. The actuary considers factors such as employee age, salary, completed and future service, expected salary growth, turnover, retirement, mortality, expected timing of the payout, and discount rates. These assumptions allow us to estimate the present value of the future gratuity obligations. So, in effect, actuarial valuation converts thousands of the individual employee promises into a measurable financial liability. But it can also tell us something else. When are those obligations likely to emerge as cash flows? Let's take two companies again. Both have a 100 crore gratuity liability. Company A has an average liability duration of, let's say, 12 years. Company B has an average duration of 4 years. The balance sheet says 100 crore. The actuarial analysis says something much more informative. Company's A's obligation is spread in much further into the future. B's obligation is much more immediate. Therefore, the two companies have very different cash flow requirements, liquidity considerations, sensitivity to actuarial assumptions, and financial risk profiles. This is why I believe that when management looks at an actuarial valuation, it shouldn't stop at the liability figure. It should also ask, what does the future cash flow profile looks like? And then comes the discount rate. There is an important connection here. The maturity of a liability also matters when we think about the discount rate. A liability payable mainly in next couple of years behaves differently from a liability extending to 10, 15 or 20 years into the future. For a long duration gratuity liability, changes in the discount rate can have a meaningful impact in the reported liability. For example, if the duration of liability is around 10 or 11 years, even a relatively small movement in the discount rate can result in significant change in the present value. So, when we talk about the discount rate in actuarial valuation, we are not just talking about the arbitrary percentage. We are dealing with a liability that has a particular timing and duration. What should management take from the valuation? I would suggest looking at the actuarial valuation from three perspectives. First, how much do we owe? And that's the reported gratuity liability. Second, when are we likely to pay it? That's the maturity or the expected cash flow profile. Third, how sensitive is that liability? And that's where we look at the things such as discount rate, salary growth, and other sensitivity to other assumptions. Together, these provide a much more complete picture of the employee benefit obligation. You shouldn't look at company's 100 crore gratuity liability and stop there. You should ask how much of this liability is expected to crystallize in next 1 year. How much over the next 3 or 5 years? What is the average duration? How much is sensitivity to changes in actuarial assumptions? So, if I had to summarize the whole discussion in one sentence, it would be this. The liability tells you how much you owe. The maturity profile tells you when you are likely to need the money. And that is one of the reasons actuarial valuation is much more than an accounting compliance exercise. It can help management understand not just the size of the gratuity liability, but also its timing, duration, and financial risk. So, the next time you receive a gratuity valuation report, don't just look at the financial liability number. Ask your actuary, what does my gratuity maturity profile look like? Because sometimes when you owe the money can be just as important as how much you owe. Thank you for listening to me. Please subscribe our channel. We keep on posting some informative videos related to valuation. Please do reach out if you need any support on actual valuations.